In terms of ethical issues associated with price, you could have price fixing, right? Price fixing controls the market price, or the supplier demand of a good or service, right? So essentially, it's when competing sellers agree to maintain a certain price. It often blocks new competitors from joining the market, and it also stops consumers from receiving the benefits of fair competition, right? You could have price increases. So price increases in bad circumstances. So, for example, there may be people who increase the price when they know that a good is scarce. So, for example, during the hurricane season, they may increase the price of water. So, typically, a bottle of water is, let's say, $1.59. When a hurricane hits and consumers need water and they're looking for water, a company might decide to start charging $4 for a bottle of water. We saw that with Hurricane Harvey. I'm going to focus specifically in my lecture on price discrimination and deceptive pricing, and I'll talk about those in the next slides. So, price discrimination occurs when a firm charges different prices to different customers for reasons other than differences in cost. So, if I were making a dress for two people and one person was much taller than the other, and I had to use much more fabric than I would need to on a person who's shorter, I might charge the person who's taller a little bit more, right? You could argue that this makes sense because you're using more material, yada yada. But if you have two people the exact same height, the exact same weight, everything is the same, and you charge one more because they have red hair, that's problematic, right? That becomes price discrimination. So Amazon was actually criticized for doing this in the early 2000s because it offered lower prices to new customers, right? So how do you get people hooked on Amazon? You offer those people lower prices, and then when they stop being new customers, you just start charging them regular prices. Um, Other companies, Staples, Steam, which is a video game store, and Amazon again, because Amazon can be an interesting company, was also caught varying the price of their products by geographic location, almost as much as 166% more, right? So let's say they charge a person, let's say you were buying a video game, and they charged a person in Michigan $50 and a person in LA 75, and they just based it on geography, even though there was no real difference in cost. That's price discrimination. That is illegal. Orbitz also got caught engaging in price discrimination. And what they were doing, I thought this was pretty interesting, is that they were caught charging more, almost up to, I'm sorry, as much as 30% more to customers who were using Mac computers versus PCs. Their rationale, if I remember correctly, was that people with Mac often have more money. Haha, jokes on them. And so they were charging more money. This is illegal. It's also problematic, and it is an ethical issue when it comes to price and marketing. So, deceptive pricing occurs when a seller states prices or price savings that mislead consumers or are not actually available to consumers. So, a competitor might do something like claim prices that are lower than their competition, right? So, they might say, we have TVs for $199, while our competitors' TVs start at $299, even though it's the same TV. And then you get there and they don't actually have televisions for $199. That is deceptive pricing. Deceptive pricing also occurs when people say they're going out of business. I've lived in locations, or at least visited locations, where people would have going out of business signs up for years, as in they've been going out of business for 15 years now. That is deceptive. Bait and switch, when you lure customers into the store for a very low price, but the item is just not there. And so instead, you offer them a more expensive product. So this happens a lot. Um, when you think about Black Friday, right? So I would say 5 years ago, a decade ago, um, all the big retailers would put out Black Friday ads, and they would say something like, we have this 52-inch television, and we're selling it for $250, right? Now what they are obligated to do, and what they will do because they've just had so much consumer backlash, is, Walmart, Target, whoever will say up front, we only have X number of these available in the store, or a limited quantity, because you get 500 people, or that's an exaggeration, maybe 50 people who are standing in line to get that television, but the store will only have three. Um, I'll give you another example that I think is also deceptive, and that's stores like J.C. Penney's or Kohl's. So these stores have a sale virtually every weekend, and every weekend they claim it's some new sale, right? When if you really look at their pricing, the pricing doesn't really change that much. But they're always saying this is the lowest price sale of the week of the year, and yada yada yada, and just kind of this constant sale situation. I think is somewhat deceptive. Again, looking at ethical issues within the 4P framework, we have to talk about promotion strategy and promotion. There are so many ethical issues that come up with this strategy. Bait and switch advertising, false and deceptive advertising, misleading advertising, promotional allowances, marketing to vulnerable consumers, sex-based advertising, you name it. I'm going to speak to a lot of these, not all, but a lot of these in the next few slides. So I mentioned marketing to vulnerable consumers. We could talk about a lot of groups as vulnerable consumers. So in certain instances, minority consumers are vulnerable. In certain instances, women can be vulnerable consumers. In certain instances, men can be vulnerable consumers. High school, elderly people, you name it. Every group has the opportunity to be vulnerable, or classified as a vulnerable consumer, and there are plenty of companies who take advantage of that. Specifically, though, here I'm going to talk about children. It's probably selling to children is problematic, right? One, they don't necessarily understand the intention to sell. So when they see advertising, they may see it as something interesting, fun, so on and so forth, but they don't understand that they're being persuaded as much as an adult would. They also don't understand the fine print. So things like batteries not included, which sounds like a small thing, but it adds to the price of the product, and it increases frustration oftentimes for parents. Optional accessories, right? So now we know that when people play video games, it often costs a lot of money to not only buy the video game, but to buy accessories within the video game. They don't understand the health consequences of certain advertising, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Um, when you're marketing to kids and they see Coca-Cola, or they see Cocoa Puffs, or um, Lucky Charms or whatever, the values being promoted tend to be kind of interesting, right? So maybe I gave bad example. Let me give better examples. When they see examples of, monster trucks being promoted, or really expensive clothing, or really expensive jewelry, essentially those advertisers are promoting materialism, which is something we may not want to have promoted to our young children. And then there is some family conflict, right? Kids don't realize that they're being persuaded, like the advertisers are intending to persuade, yet they still are persuaded, right? They buy into whatever advertisers are targeting, and it can cause family conflict. I remember going up to my mom plenty of times after watching TV and saying, I want X. Well, maybe my mom's not going to buy X, and you see this conflict. So I talked about this idea of unhealthy or healthy consequences, or unhealthy consequences associated with advertising to children. One way that companies have started advertising to kids right now is through the use of advert games. So examples of advert games I show on the right hand side here, where, excuse me, the company creates a video game or an online game, um, and kids can play it, but while they're playing it, they're being manipulated to want those products, right? They're being persuaded. A kid plays a game with Chester Cheetah, and it's about finding Cheetos. Yeah, the kid eventually is going to want Cheetos. If they're playing something like Oreo Land, yeah, the kid is eventually going to want Oreo games. So research has shown that when kids play these games, right, it increases nutrition poor snack food, right? So, or this thing says nutrient poor snack food, but nutrition poor snack food is fine as well. It reduces fruit and vegetable consumption. Um, these effects tend to be more dramatic for consumers who play avid games more regularly. So if the kid plays avid games a lot, this will happen. What's really interesting is that I'm talking about children as vulnerable consumers, but research has shown that there's no difference between a child and an adult when it comes to avid games. So if you as an adult play Oreo Land, or you play Doritos Dash of Destruction, I think that's what that says, you too will want more snack food and less fruit and vegetables. However, if you or a kid plays healthy food avid games, it actually increases fruit and vegetables, or increases fruit and vegetable consumption. Um, the issue though is who is going to make fruit and vegetable avid games? Who's going to make healthy food avid games? A lot of companies aren't going to, right? The people who manufacture or grow broccoli aren't trying to make a broccoli avid game, right? Oftentimes these products are made in interesting places and farmers and lots of things going on, and they don't really have a reason to make avid games. So who will do it? Who's going to step in and do it? And the argument against saying, hey, the government is going to do it, is that you have to ask yourself, again, is it the government's role to completely try to police these things? And should the government be spending money on something like healthy food avid games? Kind of an ethical question there. So another issue that falls under the promotion umbrella, ethical issue that falls under the promotion umbrella, is marketing stereotypes. Marketing advertisements often promote stereotypes, whether it's gender, racial, weight related, socioeconomic status, disability, LGBTQ, religion, non religious, so on and so forth. I like on the left side of the screen, you see these ads that try to counter these stereotypes, right? So the one in the top left hand corner, run like a girl, dance like a girl, sing like a girl, kick like a girl, fight like a girl. The one right next to it, I'm slow, but I'm lapping everyone on the couch, right? Trying to fight this weight and age related stereotype. And then the one on the bottom, you got to love this. Are you man enough to be a nurse? At the end of the day, we know that we need more men in nursing. Research has shown this to be true as consumers become older, as they become larger, so on and so forth, as patients, I should say. It's good to have men in those roles. It's also a pretty decent career choice at a time when men as a whole um, seem to be on the decline when it comes to these type of kind of established careers. But I would argue, like these ads on the left show, we do see some marketing that is trying to fight stereotypes. I thought I would include a few more. So in the left-hand corner at the top, you see this play set where it's a play kitchen, right? And you see both a boy and a girl who are both in the play kitchen. I would argue this wouldn't have happened 50 years ago. Right under that, you see an ad for a soccer mom who rides a Harley, right? So she's a Harley soccer mom. 50 years ago, again, you would not have seen that. This idea that this woman could be a soccer mom and also an avid Harley enthusiast. I mentioned in class, I think last week, about this idea that men now are featured in ads when it comes to childcare. And you see that in this ad. Dads don't take sick days. Dads take NyQuil, right? The ad on the right hand side. I really want to pull your attention to the ad in the middle. So this was actually very controversial when it came out. I think it came out at the end of 2017, Women's Running. It was controversial because they're featuring an overweight runner. And a lot of people came in and weighed in and said, hey, I don't think it's right that you feature an overweight runner. And other people came back and said, just because someone's overweight doesn't mean that they don't exercise or participate in exercising, and or that kind of putting this woman on the cover won't inspire more people to pick up running. But we do see this. We see um, ad or advertising and marketing that is targeting um, typically stereotyped groups. Okay, this is my last example of marketing stereotypes, I promise. I talked about the overweight runner that was featured in Women's Running. Now I'll talk about the UK version, United Kingdom version of Cosmopolitan, which featured Tess Holliday on its cover. I believe this was last year. Tess Holliday is an plus size model. Um, when you look at social science research. So an article came out, I believe, at the beginning of this year. Actually, I know it is. You can look at the article. I put the link at the bottom here. Americans' unconscious bias on the basis of sexual orientation and race dropped dramatically over the past decade, but bias against people based on body weight has increased. What does that look like? Well, what they found in their research is that sexual attitudes have changed about 33% in the last decade. So people are less likely to be biased against people whose sexual orientation is different than they were a decade ago. Similarly, racial attitudes, unconscious bias when it comes to racial attitudes has dropped about 17%, and skin tone attitudes about 15%. But from about 2004 to 2010, body weight bias has increased by about 40%, which means people tend to be more biased against overweight people. So when Tess Holliday was on the cover of Cosmo, this was a really big deal. And what we saw was a ton of backlash, right? So yes, you did see some people who were like, oh, this is awesome, body diversity, yada, yada, yada. But you saw a lot of people who were tweeting Tess Holliday, who were tweeting Cosmo and saying, you shouldn't put her on the cover, you shouldn't glamorize this, yada, yada, yada. And it's really interesting that UK Cosmo decided to do this knowing that that weight related bias is increasing. You could argue that maybe they're trying to play a part in decreasing weight related bias, or you could also argue that maybe they're just trying to get more people looking at the magazine. I mean, I'm not cynical, but we could say it's either one. So marketers get a lot of flack for sex-based advertising, right? And sex-based marketing. We've seen the Wendy's commercials where Paris Hilton or other models are very explicitly kind of laid out and they have this huge burger. And I'm sure you can think of a lot of sex-based ads. Well, research has looked into this, unsurprisingly. And what they found is that men just like it. So men like sex-based advertising. So you're talking to 49, 50% of the population and you're speaking their language. They like it. They don't care if it's sex-based advertising for toothpaste, if you're using it for toothpaste, if you're using it for cereal, or you're using it for fancy cars. They just like it across the board. The same research, though, shows that women also like it, but women only like sex-based advertising for expensive products. So women do not like sex-based advertising if the product is inexpensive. So no sex-based advertising for a toothbrush or toothpaste. They want it for a diamond ring, so on and so forth. My question to you, of course, is why is that true? Why is it that women want sex-based advertising for expensive things, less so for cheap things? So think about that. So some people will argue that marketing promotes materialism. So materialism is defined as a way of thinking that gives too much importance to material possessions rather than to spiritual or intellectual things. Um, I'll first start off by saying that in and of itself, materialism is a value judgment, right? According to people who don't like materialism, more interest needs to be given to spiritual and intellectual things rather than goods, products, services, so on and so forth. And I'm not saying I think that's wrong, but I am going to say, of course, that I do think that's a value judgment. But I do like this little thing on this e-card on the right hand side, Black Friday, because only in America people trample others for sales exactly one day after being thankful for what they already have. I just think that's really funny, especially if you really sit down and think about Black Friday. So I want to kind of think about this idea that marketing promotes materialism, and I want to kind of look at a few studies that have been done. The first is the price of well-being. So in 2013, Gallup ran a poll, the Wall Street Journal printed it, where they looked at how happy people are as a percentage of households by annual income. And what they found is that when you make less than $10,000, you tend to be you tend to have more people who classify themselves as not too happy, right? You're asking consumers how happy they are. The number goes down the more money the person or annual or household makes, right? So the least happy when your household makes less than 10 grand, you could think of maybe people who um, there are a lot of different people who might fall into that category. But you see that the percentage of households that claim that they are happy or very happy tends to increase the more money that people make. Why is it that people tend to be happier when they make more money? You tell me. Think about it. At the same time, while you're thinking about that, I want you to look at the chart on your right. So when we think about values, so this started being measured around 1967, and it goes until 2003. And they ask people, what do you value more? And in 1967, developing a meaningful philosophy of life was valued significantly more um, than being very well off financially. I mean, look at those numbers. In 1967, about 87% of people said developing a meaningful philosophy of life is more important, whereas roughly 40% of people said being very well off financially is more important. Around 1979, 1980, these numbers started changing, and it flipped quite a bit, right? So now in 2003, excuse me, what, roughly 75, almost 80% of people say that being very well off financially is more important than and in life, whereas what, roughly 40%, maybe a little bit less, say that developing a meaning philosophy of life is more important. Why is it that now, roughly 40 years later, people think that being very well off financially is more important than developing a specific philosophy of life? I'm not going to argue personally. I'm not going to argue it's because of marketing, because there was marketing in 1967, and frankly, the marketing was much worse. I showed you a picture in one of the slides last week that talked about marketing throughout the years, and the fact that when marketing first became a really big juggernaut, you had these slick car salesman type figures who were trying to peddle anything to you. Um, so what's going on here? I want you to think about it. So while you're thinking, I'll add kind of one more slide to this scenario here. So does anyone know what feudalism is? Do you know what feudalism is? So feudalism was the dominant social system in medieval Europe, right? Where nobility, so kings, queens, knights, so on and so forth, held lands from the crown. So they basically borrowed, almost owned, but the crown, the king owned lands in exchange for military service, and vassals were in turn tenants of the nobles, while the peasants, right, were obliged to live on their lord's land and give him homage, labor, and a share of the produce. Um, in exchange for military protection. So essentially what you had is you would have these knights, right? Knigts. Um, and they would be granted land from the king, right? So let's say you were a knight and you were granted, the space that LCA is in and the business school is in, right? And you have yourself a castle or some land, and you have a lot of peasants. So let's say you have, I don't know, 60 acres. No, let's say 260 acres. And you have a ton of peasants, right? Really poor people living in that land, right? You had these peasants, and they would give you labor, so they come clean your house and detail your car. No, I'm sure, but essentially stuff like that. And they would also work the land, right? So they were farmers. They would work the land, and they would give you a rather large portion of whatever they cultivated. So, if they were kind of producing apples and bananas and whatever they were producing, they would give you quite um, a large amount of it. And as this picture on the left says, sire, the peasants say you're just using them. Essentially, they were just using them, right? They were using them for their labor. Um, and what happened in scenarios like this is that the knights and the queen and all of these people, the nobility, they'd have these fancy parties, and they'd have dinner parties where they'd invite a ton of people, and they would have these massive feasts. Lots of food, like lots of food, much more food than we have now. And people would dress up, and they'd have nice clothes, and they'd have their hair done and all these things. And even when they didn't have parties, they still had massive amounts of food, and their peasants would be the ones who would serve them, and yada, yada, yada. While this was going on, it seemed as though the nobility couldn't help but want more and more, right? If they had 4 pies, they wanted 10 pies. If they had, killed a deer and a bison or these kind of things, they wanted even more. At the same time, these people who are peasants, I would argue, are probably at home, or kind of serving the knights and the kings and queens, and they too want stuff, right? They were born into a certain life, but they too wanted stuff. Now, you could argue that marketing was very minimal in days like this. I won't say that there was no marketing, but marketing in and of itself was not the discipline we see here, and it was much, much less complex, very simple. And yet, these people wanted tons of stuff, both groups. The haves and the have nots still wanted things. Why is that? I would argue it's because we have an innate nature to want, right? We not necessarily every person on the planet wants a bazillion things in their home and wants to buy things and wants to spend all their money. But in general, as humans, we have the desire to acquire things. We have the desire to want things. So I would push back on this idea that marketing is causing people to want things. I think that's just human nature. What marketing tends to do is to focus your wants, right? You might not know that what you wanted was this new pair of shoes until you saw a Nike advertisement. But you definitely wanted to spend your money. You definitely wanted something. You might not have known what it is. I always like to say, when I was growing up, I mentioned that I have a brother. I do. And he was a spender. I was more of a saver. My mom used to say, this guy spends money like he has a hole in his pocket. This is true. My brother, when he gets money, he loves to spend it. He doesn't necessarily always have to know exactly what he wants to spend it on, but he knows he wants to spend it. And that's just like what happened in feudalism. That's just like what happens in real life now. In your household, you probably know people, you might be one of them, who has wants all the time. You just have an innate need to want something, and marketing just helps you figure out what it is you want to spend your money on. One thing that I want to make clear with my analogy from the previous slide is that I don't believe that marketers create needs. So what I do believe, and what a lot of people tend to believe, particularly marketers, which is why I'm sharing it with you, is that marketers create awareness that these needs exist, rather than actually creating the need itself. Right? So marketers create awareness of the need rather than the need. Are advertising and marketing necessary? I think so, yes. I tend to be a big proponent of information dissemination, and advertising and marketing are definitely important to information dissemination. Um, does that mean that all marketing and advertising are necessary? Maybe not. But marketing and advertising in general, I would say yes. Do marketers promise miracles? I would say not if they're honest, because they don't have the opportunity or the ability to create miracles. However, there are times when marketers are dishonest. We all know this. We've seen it. The government has cracked down on it and continues to do so, and probably will continue to do so forever and ever and ever. BOGO is also problematic when it comes to things like food. Now you go to the grocery store and they too are running sales, right? And I can't really, and I don't think anyone else is really going to complain about BOGO when it comes to something like tortilla chips or candy, because there's a very good chance that you'll eat 2 bags of tortilla chips and or 2 bags of candy. But when it comes to BOGO for things like carrots or milk, there's only so much you're going to eat. And so what happens is that people won't pass up the deal. Oh, buy one, get one 75%. Let me get 2 bags of carrots. But you're not going to actually eat 2 bags of carrots. So why are you picking up 2 bags of carrots? Again, you can lay some of the blame on consumers. You know you're not going to eat 2 bags of carrots. You know you don't need 3 packs of beets or whatever, and yet we still feel compelled to get them when we're confronted with these buy one get one free or half off or whatever scenarios. So yes, marketing does contribute to excess consumption and waste. The issue with this view, though, is that you have to assume that consumers have some level of agency or choice when it comes to where they receive their news and kind of what they choose to do with that news. Um, that said, the internet offers people a large diversity of websites to get their news and information from, right? I could probably name 20 different websites that a consumer could use to get information. And yet, with all the available options that the internet allows us, people are still going to the biggest, the wealthiest media giants. The number one news site in the country is still Yahoo News. The number one finance site in the country is still Yahoo Finance. So, despite having NPR or um, the New York Times or the BBC or the Daily News, which I have to say, the Daily News, although they are a British website, they really follow American news. um, Google News, ABC News, the New York Times. You can think of all these places, and yet people still tend to congregate around these kind of well-established places. The whole point of the internet is that you're supposed to get this diversity of views, and you're supposed to have a lot of options in terms of where you can get your news. And now that we see that playing out, you do have a lot of options. We also see that a lot of people don't follow through on those options. In fact, I would argue if we were kind of to do a more recent poll, this is from Nielsen and this is from 2010, if we were to do a more recent poll, I bet you a lot of people would just say they get their news from Apple News or whatever social media website they they subscribe to, as opposed to subscribing to newspapers and things like that. Some people will argue that marketers have too much power to influence consumers for bad, but I would argue for good too. So I'm going to kind of talk about both of those ideas. And yet, we can absolutely argue that maybe in some instances, marketers do have too much power. Does anyone know where this picture is taken from? Anybody going once, going twice? None of you? No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Anyway, this is from a song called Video Killed the Radio Star. And the song talks about the fact that before video and TV was around, you could make it in the music industry by having a good voice, by having a powerful, well-liked voice. And now it's more than just your voice. It's your look. It's your presence. It's how you arrive to award shows. Are you half naked? This kind of thing. Where 70 years ago, you could be the most unattractive person in the world with the best voice and still be a star. And now you have to be 22 and willing to show your entire body if you're a woman, or 40 and really problematic if you're a man. I'll say that really problematic in terms of what you say about women and what you say about other things to be respected. All right. I want to conclude this portion of the lecture by talking about the pros and the cons of promotion. So pros, it provides information to allow selection of the best product. Promotion boosts the economy by stimulating sales. It provides entertainment. It enables companies of all sizes to compete in some form or manner. It opens the world to companies, right? It opens up the world to companies. Now a tiny shop in, Georgia can sell products to someone living in Oregon, for example. It can be an important factor in campaigns, particularly campaigns that are aimed at achieving socially oriented objectives, like the elimination of drug abuse or health and fitness information or educational information, so on and so forth, or disseminating information about, let's say, the pandemic. It can also increase the firm's units sold, so which would result in lower production costs and lower sales prices and these kind of things. That can happen. So if rather than getting you to buy one bottle of or can or plastic, whatever, of ketchup, Heinz might be able to convince you to buy two or three, rather than getting, an Apple Watch for yourself. Apple may convince you to get an Apple Watch for both yourself and your partner, so on and so forth. There are, however, some pros to promotion. We see issues with exaggerated claims or lies, right? You could think of something as simple as wrinkle cream, right? A wrinkle cream is not going to solve all your problems when it comes to wrinkles. Poor taste and offensiveness. We see a lot of ads that may be what we consider to be poor taste and offensive. Um, we see irritating repetition and intrusiveness. For example, if I watch the NFL online, often not only do I see the same ad for every commercial, but even when they try to change, they always go back to, this same ad. It can encourage the usage of what some would consider unethical products like alcohol, tobacco, gambling. They also promote their products. It can perpetuate stereotypes. It can play on human desires like your self esteem, your security. ADT and security companies play off of this all the time. And your feelings of acceptance, right? You must buy these Nike shoes to be accepted by your peers, so on and so forth. I mean, I think they say something like almost 90% of all college students own an iPhone, right? I think part of that has to do with this acceptance factor. It encourages people to believe that their needs and desires can best be satisfied by purchases. So it can, of course, make people feel as though they can achieve their goals via products, right? You'll feel happier about yourself. You'll feel successful. You'll feel all of these things if you buy a house, if you buy a car, if you buy an Apple Watch, if you buy what else could you buy? A Rolex, so on and so forth. This is particularly true with our now fascination with celebrity culture and following influencers and celebrities online and trying to emulate them by buying the products that they buy, which in a lot of cases are very expensive. And then it can create needs or wants that previously didn't exist, in the sense that um, it makes you more aware of those needs and wants, right? Rather than just kind of create, we would say it makes you more aware. So the last P that I'll talk about distribution, I'm only going to talk about two things, and I'm not dedicating additional slides to them, so I'll just get to it. The first is dumping. When you export a product to a foreign country at a price below the normal price for that country, So for example, if you started exporting olive oil and charging $1 a bottle, essentially what you'll do is create a monopoly in that country. You'll drive other retailers or olive oil kind of sellers out of business, and then you become the monopoly, right? So you're able to create a monopoly doing that. And then the second, dealer's rights. Um, Markets at times give exclusive rights of distribution only to certain dealers, and those dealers may choose to misuse such rights. That said, I can think of some examples that I would consider personal dealer rights issues. The government may not believe this to be true, but I think it's problematic where when you're in situations where, let's say, Comcast gets to go in and be the only provider of internet services or cable services, and then they do things like jack up the price. I think this is one of the reasons that people have started cutting the cord even more. The price increases have gotten ridiculous, but it's a never-ending cycle, right? The more people that cut the cord, the more Comcast will need to increase their pricing, so on and so forth. I think that said, I think I read something that said Comcast last quarter results were actually better than expected. More people were getting back into cable. I could be wrong, but I do think I read that. And you can probably think of other examples of this as well. So I've talked about some issues with marketing. I want to talk about some of the good that marketing does in the next few slides. First and foremost, marketing affects business, right? It helps businesses find markets for their products and services and sell them profitably, right? So marketing helps companies find markets for their products, for their services, and make a profit. Those are things that businesses are expected to do. Marketing also encourages competition, right? So when Wendy's gets out here and they promote themselves, let me give a better example. When Chick-fil-A gets out here and promotes itself as having the best chicken sandwich, and someone like Popeye steps in and says, "Hey, hey, no, no, we'll create a chicken sandwich as well," that's increased competition. I think Wendy's has tried to get into the fray and say, "We have a chicken sandwich," I mean, you can have your own opinion about it, but again, increased competition. When a company makes a new product and starts marketing it, that in and of itself is enough in some cases to increase competition. You get copycats who come on the market. You get some people who say we can do it better. When marketers get out and advertise on price or advertise on quality, competitors start advertising on similar things. Again, increased competition. Marketing also helps people. Marketing provides better products at a lower cost. When marketing is going well, this is what we see. And so when no monopolies are around, if the store down the street decides that they're going to start selling eggs at $1.69 and they start advertising it, there's a very good chance that another store in the neighborhood will match that price or beat it, right? So marketing does help consumers find better products at a lower cost. In terms of other ways that marketing helps people, marketing is a huge employer. Research suggests that somewhere between a fourth to all jobs are considered marketing related, right? So about a fourth to one third of all jobs in the US fall under the umbrella of marketing. So we're employing people, and that's a good thing. And lastly, marketing benefits society. It helps consumers make more effective decisions about what to purchase. Because we have things like more transparency, because we have the nutrition facts panel, because we have labels, because we have advertisements, we have more information than ever before, because we have the internet. Companies are putting out more information, consumers are putting out information, YouTube videos, so on and so forth. And now that we have this information, we're able to make better decisions on how to spend our time, how to spend our money, and how to spend other resources, right?